But welcome and thank you very much for this opportunity that you have given us for me to explain why my organization, FANRPAN, is endorsing the Farming First concept. I'm going to take you through some slides, and then after that we can open for questions, and feel free in between to interrupt if you want any clarification. What is the context of Farming First? Why Farming First? I'm sure you all agree with me that we are sitting at an era where agriculture is coming back to the drawing board. We are looking at the challenges that we face, where 40 to 55% decline in arable land per capita is expected by 2030. We are experiencing volatile weather. Climate change is with us and with us to stay. We are looking at a global population that is increasing by at least 1 billion every 10 years, and it is predicted that by 2030, there will be an additional 1.7 billion mouths to feed. We are also looking at consumption trends that are changing, with some regions going for protein-dense foods, which means there's need for increased productivity of our cereals rather than feeding our livestock. Unfortunately, with all this, we've experienced in the last 20 years a decline in investment in agriculture. This has gone down from 17 to 3%. And the challenge we face is, how do we feed the increasing population with less investments in agriculture but increased demand for food? I think another major challenge that we are going to be facing worldwide is the issue of water. It is predicted that by 2025, 1 in 4 people will be facing water scarcity. Now, clearly, all these statistics call for a need for us to look at sustainable agriculture. How do we protect our environment and at the same time make sure there's enough to feed the world? Why then are we looking for a plan that is going to put sustainable agriculture as a solution to sustainable development? I think we have come together as a consortium to ensure that all these interventions and dialogues put the farmer first. For us in Southern Africa, for us in Africa, it's really about the smallholder farmer. For as long as we do not look at interventions that will make sure that the farmers are not aid dependent and food dependent, but they're able to first and foremost feed themselves and then to feed the rest of the population, who will always depend on food aid. What is exciting in this plan is that it's an all-inclusive plan. For a long time, African governments would want to address policy challenges alone. But what we are calling for now is a concerted plan whereby governments are not doing it alone, but they are partnering with civil society groups such as the private sector, such as the research and scientific community, and all the other technology, and most important, you have the farmer at the center of those dialogues. And we are planning in concert to make sure that we have a sustainable long-term plan to address the food needs. Another challenge we have faced is that in most cases our interventions have been political statements where we make pledges, these are not followed up. But more important, there is no knowledge that is feeding into the interventions. If we look at the recent food crisis, the immediate intervention by most governments was to close their borders, restrict exports, and just say, no markets, what we have is ours, we are not going to trade. But was there any research to inform those kind of interventions? No. But what we are calling for under Farming First is well thought out plans that are evidence-based. And there's a lot of learning that we can share between our African countries and globally within the international community on how best to respond to the food crisis, particularly for Africa. Who then are the people who should participate in this all-inclusive plan? We have the policymakers, and we believe that policymaking will always remain the preserve of government, but you cannot have a policy that's put in place without the implementers making a contribution. Therefore, the need for think tanks to participate in policy processes is key. You also need the role of farmers, ordinary citizens, the consumers, to have a say on what is the best and conducive environment for sustainable agriculture. And this is why we look at a three-pronged approach where the policymaker is key, where civil society, farmers, the private sector and researchers are key, and think tanks where knowledge is feeding into the plans that we are putting into place. This then talks to the main promoters of the Farming First concept. The original sponsors bring in farmers, and you're talking of the global farming community. You're talking of scientists under the ICSU, International Council for Science, and that's the grouping that I represent. And you're talking of business and industry. And really here we are talking of sustainable agriculture, where we're talking of economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And these are the three drivers in terms of informing the Farming First concept. What then are the principles? The Farming First concept is anchored on 6 major principles, and I'll just run through these one by one so that you get an understanding. I've emphasized that the farmer is at the center, so we are talking of farming as a solution to sustainable development and sustainable agriculture. Let me just go through these one by one. First and foremost, we're talking about our natural resources. I've already given you the statistics of what is happening in terms of the available land and land that will be available by 2030. But if I may just highlight some of the interesting statistics that my own organization, FANRPAN, has come up with in a study we've recently completed 2 weeks ago in Swaziland. 90% of our smallholder farmers are dependent on firewood for their energy supply. What that means is that you have people going out every morning to chop firewood so that they can meet their basic energy needs. Of the smallholder population, 10% are dependent on firewood for sale. It means you have people who have commercialized the use of that firewood, illegally, in most cases, going out to chop the wood that's available. What does that say to the challenges we are facing with climate change and the recommendations we are making in terms of safeguarding the use of our natural resources? We're talking of people who have no alternatives, who have no other options, but we're talking of a policy environment that does not allow people to explore other livelihoods to better their lives. So under Farming First, we are going to be looking at the promotion of conservation tillage as a way of enhancing our carbon stocks within our soils so that we can mitigate against climate change. We're going to be looking at watershed management. We're looking at the wildlife habitat and biodiversity protection, and we're also looking at incentives for ecosystem services. I think part of the problem is that our policies are prescriptive and people do not have the incentive to comply, and we are quick to punish.